Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lore Lords 58, where we're talking about a very famous cryptid that we've brought up a couple times before, but now we're finally going to give this little guy the attention that they deserve. Atlas, how are you tonight?
Oh, Atlas is here, and Atlas is ready to cover something we've been working on. I've been, not working on, but having on the back burner for a while.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, we all knew it was coming. We all knew it was gonna
this is a story for the ages. That if you're looking at the episode now and you're seeing the title, you know exactly what it's about.
Oh yeah,
and this is a famous one. It's probably, I think, like as big as Bigfoot. You know.
Yeah, especially after I actually didn't know much about Mothman before we did the first cryptids episode. Because for those who don't know, we did an episode called National Parks, which was like the first time we went over cryptids. And during the episode, we were streaming live on chat as we normally do, and somebody in the chat kept saying, "Do Mothman, do Mothman." And so, this has literally been on the plate for a while, and I didn't really know much about Mothman. And then Atlas basically gave me the spiel, and then I played Fallout 76 too, and that helped.
And then we also did an episode, this is kind of a sequel to, called The Flap of 66.
Which is one of my favorite episodes where I lose my mind.
Yeah, this is basically the sequel. This is Flap of 66 Part 2.
Oh my god, it's finally here!
So we're going to talk a little bit about that kind of stuff. Because there's but, for this episode, I'm titling it Point Pleasant, Sure, yeah. It's about the Mothman, but we're actually going to go really deep into the story of the city of Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Great.
Because it's integral to Mothman, and we did talk about it a little bit on the 66 Flap episode, just a little bit. So now is when we're going to we're going to deep dive into it. So, without further ado, I'm going to get started. In America, we have a lot of haunted stuff. We've talked about it. A lot of supernatural stuff. A ton of cryptid stuff.
True.
It's more than most other countries, and I think a lot of reasons for that is because of the mixed people in America, which we've talked about as well. I think that just makes sense. You get all these cultures together. They share their legends. They share their myths. And that leads to new myths and legends being made. But there is few places that have had more mysterious events or sightings than Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And there's one specific thing in that city the area is known for, perhaps more than everything else. But few know the depth or how just deep the lore of this city actually goes. There's quite a story behind it. And today's episode is going to be titled For the City rather than the infamous cryptid, because we're going to go deep into this place's history.
Cool.
So, I titled part 1 "The Origins," right? Because we're going deep in there. So, the origins of this area actually goes down to oral tradition because this is America with Native Americans, so we don't know. They didn't write down a lot of their history. It's all told through stories.
Right.
So, in the oral tradition passed down by the Native American Shawnees, the area, what is now known as West Virginia, started in what is known by archaeologists as the Fort Ancient People. And this was
Fort?
Fort Ancient Peoples. Yeah, I was trying to enunciate those as best I could, just because it sounds weird. It sounds weird.
It does.
Yeah. This was a large network of different tribal peoples, and as time would go on, the people in this network would get closer through trade, through just through meeting and having gatherings together, which would lead to a shared culture. And this bound them together and would eventually form a group known today as the Shawnee. And we actually don't know, again, because of lack of recording, how old the Shawnee truly are, but it's pretty old. So I think this is kind of like these tribes that would gather in the Fort Ancient People is probably medieval era, around that time.
Okay.
Their roots were firmly put down in the region for many years. However, within the span of a few generations during the 17th century, we saw the Shawnee pull up roots and travel across the continent. And we don't 100% know why this happened. But there's some theories. And the biggest theory is that there was violence in the region from the Iroquois tribe who attacked the Shawnee in two incidents known as the Morning and the Beaver Wars.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, so these wars are pretty major. There's a bunch of stories about these wars from both tribes. People fight. It happens. This is pre-colonialism. People still fought. But
People
yeah,
still fight now.
yeah, exactly. So it's not like people. A lot of people like to deny that Native American tribes warred with each other.
Right.
They did. That's
yeah,
just how
big time.
humans work. So
we were not told that they didn't fight each other. There
No.
were some tribes that were incredibly brutal, actually.
Yes.
Some were very peaceful and kind and
100%,
loving and whatever,
yeah.
but some were very bad.
just like everyone else on the planet.
Basically it.
But their wars weren't the only explanation as to what would happen, because there was also raids from southern groups such as the Cherokees, the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, and the Tuscaroras were also tribes that would attack from the south and often enslave Shawnee people.
That's no good.
Yeah. And other smaller groups also were around, and as they would attack the Shawnee from other areas, they would start spreading disease. And the biggest cause of this, of course, was the new colonial market opening up.
Oh, white people.
Yeah. So white people showed up, and they started trading with the tribes. This is pre-white domination,
Right.
brutal wise, but so they were actually interested in trading, and a lot of the other tribes, like the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, and the Cherokees, like I mentioned before, started raiding Shawnee land and their villages for their supplies to sell to the white people, because Shawnee didn't know the white people yet. They were too inland.
That's mean.
So, yeah, they kind of became a subject to that. So they basically just left. They're like, oh, whatever, we're going to go out. And they kind of went to the Ohio territories
Okay.
by the late 1600s. And they were they were east of the Mississippi River,
Gotcha.
kind of in that area. So what we have next is something where, now the white people have moved further and they're now into their military domination style of life.
Yeah. Now it's
And
getting bad.
we're going to hit the 18th century, where something takes place called the 7 Years' War.
Oh, yeah, I know this guy.
Yeah, so this was a French war where they, between the 1750s and 1760s, we saw the Shawnee actually return to the area that is now known as West Virginia, where the Four Ancients people area. Mm-hmm. And this was unlived in by colonists at this point. There's basically no white people here. So they kind of came back and settled there, and it was on the radar for the colonists, but they really haven't gotten there yet.
Sure.
Among the Shawnee, a man was born during this time named Cornstalk. And historians believe he was born in present-day Pennsylvania around 1720. He then moved to the Ohio country as a young man, and he would rise to prominence during a conflict known as Dunmore's War. So this is a Shawnee man. I want to make that clear. He was not born in Pennsylvania in a colony. He was born
Right.
with the Shawnee people in the Pennsylvania
Right.
area. But then they kind of all went to the Ohio country, and that's kind of where the Shawnee became very prevalent. And in 1774, a conflict rose between the colony of Virginia and the Shawnee and Mingo American nations. And the governor of Virginia, John Murray, the 4th Earl of Dunmore,
Jeez.
would call out to the militia and declare war on the native nations.
Wow, that escalated very fast.
Yeah. And the reason why he decided to go to war with two Native American tribes is because there was conflict between the white settlers who were exploring and moving into the land south of the Ohio River, and the Native Americans who had the rights to hunt there. So, unsurprisingly, white colonists struck first, and as a result, the native war bands would retaliate against the colonial settlements. So this started on a huge war.
Heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, and the war would end, however, on October 10th, after a couple battles, with a fight where Chief Cornstalk himself would ambush the Virginian army at what is known as the Battle of Point Pleasant, where the battle would rage for almost a whole day, and due to lack of munitions, the white settlers had to descend to hand-to-hand melee combat. And
Jeez,
as you might expect, the natives have a huge advantage in that field.
Oh, yeah.
But they would end up being defeated. Native Americans did lose the battle, but just due to numbers, the Shawnee lost 40 warriors in that fight. The white people had 75 soldiers killed and 140 critically wounded who would probably die soon after.
Shit.
So
Jesus.
they kind of got their ass kicked, and it was only because they had more people they actually ended up forcing the Shawnee to retreat. And afterwards,
And look at how we're like, oh
Yeah.
man, the white people won.
I know, no, I know. It's I know exactly what you're saying. I was just thinking the same thing while writing this. I'm like, fuck, I'm not on their side in this at all.
Yeah, obviously.
Like, I know I'm here because of it, but still, like historically, I
be
would
happy about
Yeah,
it.
exactly. So after this, there was a peace meeting between Chief Cornstalk and Lord Dunmore, and they did make a peace treaty. And according to the stories, Chief Cornstalk was a great warrior. He was basically a war hero. Like, he himself was extremely good at killing people.
Yeah, I bet.
But that being the case, despite that, he did oppose war, and he was leading for peace the whole time. He kept trying, getting denied until after that battle. I think Dunmore lost so many dudes. He's like, we can't keep doing this.
Like, these people are crazy.
Yeah, so he agreed to the peace
Annihilators.
treaty, and he was actually one of the only leaders of the Ohio Confederacy, which was the Shawnee and Migo alliance of tribes, who wanted peace. The rest wanted to keep fighting, and he's like, no, we need to stop. Like, we're losing too many young men. Like, we can't keep doing this.
Bad.
Yeah. And the results of the treaty they agreed upon, both sides agreed was fair. The Shawnee would stop hunting south of the Ohio River, where the conflict started, but they were given sovereignty of their land to the north, recognized by the colonial states. So the British basically recognized the Shawnee as a kingdom of themselves in the northern lands of the Ohio River.
That's pretty dope.
Yeah, so it was like, okay, you have your land, we have our land. We're not going to go north. That was the agreement.
We obviously
And
didn't fucking honor that at all.
this was,
It
well,
dope.
okay. Technically, these guys did, because this was a different nation. This was colonial America. The British made this agreement, not the Americans.
Right.
So that's important to keep in mind for that situation.
Oh, god damn it.
Yeah.
I
So
can see already how this happened.
yeah, they had peace. It was a good time for them. Unfortunately for Shawnee and the Cornstalk, war was going to come again soon. Because if you remembered the date that I just said, 1774, a pretty big war happened in 1775 that changed the entire world, which was the American War of Independence.
It's a big one. It's
Yeah.
one of the big ones for sure.
It's a major war happened, and they just fought the British. They fought in the 7 Years' War against the French. So the Shawnee weren't really on anyone's side. They had fought both nations that were involved outside of the American colonists, who also they technically fought because Lord Dunmore was an American colonist. They didn't really have an ally in this war going in, but they also weren't in the 13 colonies. Ohio was not part of that. So they were in their own, they were fine, but they were worried about things kind of hitting them.
Sure, I mean, the Revolutionary War was kind of a big deal. Like,
Yeah.
not just in terms of, like, because it's our country in America. It's like, no, it was a big deal globally. Literally,
Yes.
somebody was going, fuck you to the British Empire, which was kind of a big deal at the time.
Yeah.
So, like,
And
and
most-
won.
Yeah, they did win. That they show, they showed the world monarchy doesn't need to exist. But anyway, most Native American leaders at this time sued for peace, and Cornstalk was no different. He wanted to be neutral. He did not want any part of this war. And his community had not only been damaged from the Lord Dunmore's war we just talked about, but like I mentioned, in the 50s there was 7 Years' War, and then in the 60s there was another big war called the Pontiac War that also had a huge blow on them because they were part of it. So they had been through 2 decades solidly, and now in their third of just fighting people. And Cornstalk really hoped to preserve the said sovereignty that they got from the British, and just keep to their land. But there was another party within the Shawnee, led by a man named Blue Jacket, who was much younger and favored a much more aggressive policy, and chose to ally with the British due to their promise of restricting colonial expansion after the war. So the Shawnee would send aid from the Cherokee Nation to the south in a area known as Choctaw back then, now called Tennessee, where a young chief named Dragging Canoe would accept their call to aid and send his warriors north to aid the Shawnee, and they would form up with the Cherokee and the British on the side of the war.
Damn.
In the autumn of 1776, Cornstalk, still not wanting to go to war, would end up going to Fort Pitt, speaking to a U.S. agent named George Morgan. And I looked into George Morgan because there were some weird things said about him. And I think he's Native American, and he was like an agent who was like a middleman for Native tribes for the United States, not the British.
Oh,
So I think he was born in a Native American tribe and ended up moving to colonial lands and becoming
okay.
part of the United States military. And he was known as Agent George Morgan. And kept saying Native American agent, U.S. agent George Morgan. So I think that's what that means. Which also makes sense because he actually agreed to talk to the Shawnee, who they were at war with, as opposed to just fighting them on sight. So he actually met with Chief Cornstalk, and they came to sending a letter to the Continental Congress, which stated that the Shawnee were not at war with the United States, and offered friendship, and it was just a young group of upstarts who left the Shawnee to join the British.
That's good.
Yeah, so Cornstalk was trying to save face. He'd be like, look, we're not at war with you. We just have a bunch of kids. They're gone. Like, they're not part of us anymore. But by winter, however, the Shawnee were divided almost in half between Cornstalk's neutral faction and the militant bands led by Blue Jacket and another young warrior named Blackfish. So the Shawnee basically got cut in two, and now Cornstalk goes hard on trying to preserve the Shawnee. And in October of 1777, two Shawnees visited Fort Randolph, an American fort built in the area today known as Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Oh, I can see where this is going.
So the two were detained by the fort's commander, Matthew Arbuckle, who had decided to hold hostage any Shawnee who fell into his hands because they were at war with America. Cornstalk's son, Ellen Pisco, would show up a few days later and ask why they were being held, but he never returned. So Cornstalk figured he must have got captured as well, so Cornstalk himself went to visit the fort, thinking, leader shows up, you gotta have some respect. They didn't, and they quickly detained Cornstalk and held him with the other three people who were held. Soon after they were being held, a native raid of an unknown nation, we actually don't know who did this, attacked the fort at Point Pleasant and would kill multiple of Arbuckle's men. And in retaliation, the four held Shawnee, including Cornstalk and his son, would be executed.
Fuck.
Legend states that Cornstalk, as he was killed, uttered a curse upon the people of the land, saying that it would stunt the growth of the settlement in the future and they would be forever cursed. Now, to go to the truth of that is fully incorrect and wrong. That never happened. That is a racist lie. It is actually from a play that was written and performed on the 151st anniversary celebration of the Battle of Point Pleasant. The truth is that this was written by white people on a story based on the racial stereotype that Native Americans had some kind of supernatural or magic abilities.
Right. Which still exists today, sadly.
Yeah. This did not happen. He actually did have a quote which from when he died, which was recorded by the fort. They actually did write his last words down, which were, to summarize, he basically gave a little speech saying, "Wise men don't go to war, and you can kill me if you have to, but just know it's not going to stop anything and just cause more pain in the future for those who have to do this act." That's like basically what he said.
The most reasonable thing to say as a leader.
Extremely reasonable thing to say, and an extremely wise thing to say. So
yeah, like.
Which he was pretty old at that time. So, like, he wasn't young. He was an old chief who wanted peace, and this fucking happened to him.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
However, the curse story does make a good base for the legend of a cryptid that has plagued American lore and legends for decades. So, another thing to bring up at this point is there is actually some Shawnee and other tribal, carvings of a creature with big round eyes and bat wings.
Huh.
We don't know what it is. We don't know what they were describing. We don't know what it is, but it does match the descriptions we're going to get into as we go into part 2 about the guy that's been memed out of control so everyone knows about him, and that is part 2, the Mothman.
Woo! This is the fun part, not the really, really sad racist history.
Yeah. So after that fort basically started expanding. Point Pleasant grew into a pretty, not big, but a small town. And we're going to go
humble.
We're going to go ahead about 200 years to 1966. This is where the story picks up again.
All right.
We now have a nice town. I think it had in this year about 3,000 people in Point Pleasant. And it was, steeped in the type of place where everyone knows each other. That's the kind of town this
Gotcha.
was. Like,
Yeah.
if the year 1966 sounds familiar to you, as a
'cause it should.
diehard fan of Lore Lords, that's because we did another story in this year of a man in the town of Mineral Wells, which is a small town just a couple miles north of Point Pleasant. This man would be selling sewing machines where he'd be stopped on Interstate 77 by our favorite alien ever, Mr. Injured Cold.
Hey, still looking for that phone call, bud.
Yeah, he has. I want to point out for the record, he has not contacted us.
No, we've been waiting though. We're
Yeah,
still waiting.
We're looking for him, but we haven't found him yet.
It's pretty boring, dude. I could use some excitement.
We could use it if you want to like make headlines and be famous in America. Injured Cold, just give us a call telepathically, or literally call me. Physically,
You can
call
ring
me.
the doorbell. Just don't like zap into my living room. That might freak me out a little bit. And I don't want you to scare my cat.
Yeah, don't like abduct me either. Like, I'll go with you if you ask.
Come to
legit.
me.
So just let me
Yeah.
just ask first.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you really want to know more about what the fuck we're just talked about, you got to go back and listen to the Flap of 66, where we did a deep dive into Woodrow Derenberger and his story with Injured Cold, going to the distant planet of Lanulos, and even touched about Mothman for a little bit. But that's all I'm going to talk about that for now.
That's one of my favorite episodes.
It's a great one. It's one of my favorite stories, and why I chose to do a whole episode focusing on that instead of this first, because I actually think that's kind of a cooler story. So by mid-November of 66, this area was full of people supporting Derenberger's timeline of events with meeting Injured Cold. And things took a very interesting turn. In the town of Clendenin, Clendenin, Clendenin. Yeah. About an hour southeast of Clendenin? That sounds more right, actually. No, it's an E. It's an E. It's got to be Clendenin. Clendenin, West Virginia.
Okay.
It's about an hour southeast of Point Pleasant. 5 men were working a shift as gravediggers at night, and they were surprised when they heard a loud rustling in the woods nearby, and a large winged creature would emerge and take flight. The creature was shaped more like a man with wings than a bird, and flew over the top of them, causing them to be terrified of the beast and run for cover. This would officially be the first ever sighting of the Mothman, but certainly not the last, because only 3 days later, on November 15th of 1966, a man named Newell Partridge was sitting at home watching his TV at night, as he always did. At around 10:30 in the evening, while it was dark and quiet out in the town of Salem, West Virginia, which is also just 2 hours from Point Pleasant, something very strange happened. Partridge heard a loud whining noise outside his home by his farmhouse. His TV would turn to static, and weird figures and patterns would begin emerging on the screen. Partridge would later describe in detail that the sound was loud and metallic, almost like a generator starting up. His dog, a German shepherd named Bandit, began to bark at and ran at the door of the home, looking at the barn where the sound was coming from. And when Partridge opened the door for himself and Bandit to go investigate the sound, he grabbed only his flashlight, and they ran to the barn together. As he arrived at the barn, which had an open door, it was nearly 500 feet from his house, and shined the light inside, revealing 2 large, round, disc-shaped eyes staring back at him. He ran back into his house, immediately grabbing his gun, but realized he was far too terrified to go back and encounter whatever this was. And not only that, but Partridge also realized Bandit was not with him, and he would never see Bandit again.
No.
This was not the only reported sighting of a beast with large red eyes that night in the town of Salem, but we had another sighting only an hour later at the town of Point Pleasant.
Oh.
This is when Point Pleasant stuff. Also, yeah, dick move killing a dog. Not a fan of that. Negative points for Mothman. Negative points.
Yeah, negative points for Mothman.
In the Second World War, a section of the land outside of Point Pleasant that was heavily forested became the West Virginia Ordnance Works, and it employed a lot of people, especially women, in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And as you might imagine, this factory would be in charge of manufacturing ordnance, aka explosives, for the war effort. It also stockpiled many of these explosives in steel-round bunkers known to the locals as igloos. You can see them in Google Earth today. They're still there if you want to look. In the decades after the war, however, the factory would shut down and fall into disuse, making it reclaimed by nature, and the explosives in the bunkers would also remain untouched.
Huh.
So I think they got rid of the explosives now, but there's still the igloos there are still kind of there. They kind of destroy them. You see these like round things. But yeah, they were just, in the 60s, they were just full of explosives that were just sitting there.
Yeah, they just left the bombs there. I don't know.
They literally just left the explosives there. I don't know if they were like disassembled, but apparently still dangerous enough to explode because it did become known to the Point Pleasant people as the TNT area. That was like the nickname for that area.
Oh, yeah, that's the TNT area. If you go over there, just make sure you don't have a lit cigarette. You should be fine.
It was more like, hey, do you want to go hang out and make out at the TNT area?
Classic kids in the 60s.
Because in the night of November 15th, two young married couple, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette, were at this infamous TNT area. And they were young, doing what young couples do in the 60s, exactly what you just said. And they'd, do it in a dangerous place because it's got a thrill to it. And the TNT area was heavily wooded and reclaimed by nature. So, kind of hard to see in there. It was covered in wildlife. And it kind of became as the local, like, make-out point area. They became known as that. Yeah. So,
Man, what a sad life. It's just like in order to get a thrill from making out, it's like, let's go make out on some landmines. It's like,
honey, our life isn't exciting enough. Can we go have sex on top of dynamite? Also, let's bring our neighbors with us to mix things up a bit.
Isn't that exciting enough that you're banging your neighbors too? Like, do you have to do it on TNT?
Oh, absolutely, dude. You guess it could cause for some fireworks. You know what I'm talking about? Anyway, they drove out to the area, and as they started driving, they were heading towards the TNT area, getting pretty close, and they see a large figure. A human-like figure with bat wings folded behind it just outside the power plant. By their descriptions, it was taller than your average man, and the wings were folded behind its back as it seemed to be doing something. All four of them had similar descriptions, but they all made extra note of its large, round, red eyes.
It's not Batman.
They then sped off and headed back to Point Pleasant, but the creature noticed them and began to pursue them. They claimed that they were driving at up to 100 miles per hour on the freeway back, but the creature was able to keep pace with the car. They stated that it flew alongside or just above the car with its red eyes piercing into the vehicle almost all the way back home. But as they arrived close to Point Pleasant and the buildings, the creature backed off. But the couples were still terrified, and they did what you should always do in this kind of situation and go to the police. And they encountered Deputy Sheriff Millard Halstead. Not a chef, he's a sheriff. But I do want to make a point of that. In a lot of cryptid stories, it always irritates me. People are like, yeah, I went home and wrote about it. Like, no, go tell a fucking cop. If you see a monster, go tell someone with a gun about it. And also, make an official record. Make an official record of your report is the biggest thing.
Yeah, that's actually true.
Make them put it in record that you saw this when you saw it. Because that can lead to people finding more information out in the future and stuff like that,
It's true. Even if you don't trust the police.
Even if you don't trust the police, have them write it down and file it for you. That's all you need. They'll do it.
Yeah, they can call you loony. They'll call you crazy, but it's okay.
They hate doing the paperwork, but they'll do it because that's what they have to do. So they will do the paperwork.
It's one of the okay parts of the job.
So Halstead, the sheriff, knew these couples because it was a pretty small town. Like I mentioned, everyone knew each other. And he was worried because he'd actually never seen them act up. They've never done anything weird. They were, normal young couples at the time in their young 20s.
Wow, the Smiths and the Joneses are banging?
Wait, you two were going out where? Wow, okay.
Wow, fine, that's dangerous.
But yeah, he was surprised to see them panic. So he listened to their story, and to the couple's surprise, actually took them very seriously. And one of the reasons why we think so is because allegedly they had already received other calls about the sightings of the monster. Oh, yeah. So people were calling and saying something's being seen with big red eyes in the woods. So he already was like, oh, maybe this is serious. People are reporting. Like, there was no internet back then, so people weren't like texting each other about it. So when
do you think like one of those police officers, after hearing all these stories, like went home and just had full blown panic attacks? Just like,
probably.
Oh my god!
Like,
what's
in the woods? What's in the woods? What's in the woods? Like people were freaking out. So
I
But
would
it's
not be
like
sleeping.
it's like the Phoenix Light situation. Like so many people got called. All the police got calls for tons of cities because they were seeing lights in the sky over Phoenix. So at that
Right.
point, it's like when everyone's calling at the same time, it's not
It's
like
weird.
it's most likely not some concerted effort beforehand. You know,
Right.
like so. I don't know.
It's just an art display. Some crazy kid from New York decided to put projections in the clouds.
It's a modern art piece, actually, and it's called.
monolith
I
in the
call it.
desert.
Yeah, I was gonna say I call it the Desert Monolith Project. So yeah, this was taken so seriously in Point Pleasant that they actually had a press conference the next day to assure citizens that the town is safe and that these stories are not to be taken seriously. And the conference also stated that the couple likely saw a sandhill crane, which is a large bird with skinny legs, a 6-foot wingspan, and notably amberish red eyes that reflect red when seen with light. These birds live all around North America, and they move all around North America through the year, so it's not impossible by any means. The sandhill crane pops up all the time in cryptid explanations in America, especially the Jersey Devil, which we talked about in our one of our other episodes. That a lot of people say the Jersey Devil is a sandhill crane. And I will say, I don't know if you've ever seen a heron out here.
Yes, I've seen herons. I studied marine biology, and herons were one of the birds we covered, I think.
Yeah, huge,
Yeah,
weird.
big bird.
I remember going outside when I lived in a more forested area out here. I walked outside once, and my aunt was like, Chris, go look at the stables. So I went out and looked at the stables, and there was a heron standing on top of it, and I was like, that thing is fucking huge.
It's pretty cool, though, right?
Like they're massive, and now it's like I get it. I get why people can see that at night,
yeah.
and be like,
Oh, it'd be
especially
like-
if you see red eyes reflect, you're like, oh my fucking god, it's a monster.
Oh, absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. Oh, speaking of which, my parents have like a bald eagle's nest near their place. It's cool.
Oh.
I get to watch a bald eagle fly by sometimes. It's pretty dope.
Oh wow,
Yeah,
that's epic as hell,
pretty cool.
actually, and American as hell too.
Oh, so American. Anyway.
So yeah, I'm not saying it is a sandhill crane, but I'm saying I could see it. I can see it. The Scarberries and the Mallets also did not think it was a sandhill crane and actually fought back, saying that it chased them in their car. Its eyes were huge and disc-like, not small like a bird, and it had arms and legs like a human. They were saying they're not crazy. They also said that when they looked at the eyes, you can't make out a description of the face because you're so entranced by the eyes. You can't. They're so prominent and large and like glowing that you can't really make out the rest of the face, right? And so they were saying that it did not have a beak though, like a sandhill crane. Like they would have noticed a beak. The same night, a group of men went to the TNT area armed, looking for the creature, but they didn't find anything and they didn't
Not a
see
good
it.
idea.
Don't bring your guns to the TNT area. They didn't find anything, but it does go to show you how serious the townsfolk took it. Like they really believed it. They believed all these people who saw something, so they like went up and they got their fucking rifles and went out to take care of it.
When one person gives me an anecdote, I don't believe it. When two, I get suspicious. When it's more than like 10, I'm like, all right, it's real. Fuck it.
Yeah, they're seeing something, and it's worth investigating with my 22.
And it could just be a big bird with red eyes.
Yeah, it could be a big wizard eyes. Still kill it and skin it. No, I'm joking. Don't kill giant birds, please. So the local news this time would actually be reporting the story, and they even originally wanted to call it Batman because it was a big man with bat wings. But
I feel like I've been calling it all this whole time.
yeah, I mean you're not wrong. It was they didn't do it for copyright reasons, and also. They wanted to instead make a joke of it and make it sound like a villain from the campy Adam West Batman show.
That's funny.
So they named it Owlman.
Oh, that's good.
To their disappointment, Owlman showed up a month ago as a villain in the Adam West Batman show. So they couldn't use that name. So they instead settled on the Mothman.
Which is the better name anyway.
Yeah, Mothman
alliteration.
Mothman, it's got alliteration. Also, moths are a bit like weirder and creepier than owls. Like owls are kind of like respectable. So if you're going for a horror cryptid creature, I feel like Mothman definitely takes the cake.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, I just think it was very funny though. They actually had a name for it, and like, wait, no, don't print that yet. I saw that episode last month. So the people of Point Pleasant took this story very seriously and would even be afraid to go into the woods at night for months. And this did however, attract all sorts of, people to Point Pleasant, like UFOologist John Keel.
Let's go.
We talked about him in the Flap 66 episode because he was very involved in that. John Keel was a UFOologist. He actually has an interview with David Letterman where he talks
now we have to,
all
we
about
have to
it.
hire the same actor to play him this time. We have to call him back. Get him back in here. You never thought you'd see him again, did you? Sorry, I'm really excited. I like this. I love the 66.
All right,
Flap
introducing
so much.
John Keel. No. So, yeah, he actually has an episode with David Letterman. You can watch on YouTube if you want, where he talks all about this.
What?
Yeah. I watched it for this. I saw it on YouTube. Keel was attracted by more than just the Mothman, but all the stories that happened in the Flap of 66. And he would, however, focus his efforts on Point Pleasant. It became his headquarters. He stayed at the hotel for months, as it seemed to be the hot spot of activity. For over a year, John Keel would interview over 100 witnesses of the Mothman, with all sightings occurring near the Point Pleasant area. Almost every story had the same description. Taller than a man, massive wingspans that looked bat-like, human with human-like body, large red disc eyes, and he would get so many stories. But one specifically was by Marcella Bennett that we're going to talk about right now. Okay. Bennett said that she saw a bright light in the sky above the TNT area, close to the home of her neighbor Ralph Thomas. She would go to Ralph Thomas's house with her son, because she was a single mother with her kid. She would get her son in the car and drive to Ralph Thomas's house to find out what the source of light was and what they were doing. When she went to get her kid out of the back seat of the car outside of the Thomas's home, she saw something moving on the ground nearby, looking like it was lying down and getting in the process of getting up. She said it was gray, very tall, large glowing red eyes with bat-like wings behind it. Mm-hmm. She said it began to walk towards her, and she froze in fear and even dropped her young child.
Ooh, bad mom alert.
They would both recover, however, and run into the house of Ralph Thomas, who let them inside. They would then hide inside the house along with Ralph Thomas and his family, as who also saw the creature outside. And the Mothman would continue to circle the house, trying doors, getting on the patio, and peeking inside the main front window with its red eyes. This was serious enough to legitimately traumatize Marcella Bennett for the rest of her life. After the incident, she would go through months of intense therapy. She could no longer function normally in her home, which was she was on the edge, she lived on the edge of the town, so she was so afraid to be home because of the woods that she just would not stay. She would go to people's houses, stay at hotels and stuff instead. She would be called crazy by the town, and she said that she'd be organizing part of a hoax, despite the very real mental health concerns for her that followed the incident. People who knew her said that she never had any issues until this, and that she was a very normal and good mother. And then after this happened, she lost her fucking mind.
Oh, well, okay, great.
Yeah, so it's that adds a little bit of credence that she probably saw something, or something happened to me.
Right.
If it was a hoax, she went through a whole lifetime dedication of it through like mental facilities and intense therapy and psychiatric help. So
what a great prank.
Yeah, great prank. The Thomas family even backed her up. They said that, yeah, we were there, like this happened, but people still wouldn't listen to her. But you know, that's what happened. That's I feel like it's normal. People wouldn't expect that. They just thought it was a hoax and they were trying to cash in on the media.
Yeah.
If you listen to the Flap of 66, you might remember the name John Keel, like I mentioned before, because he was the one who actually interviewed Woodrow Derringer about his story. So most of the story that we had came from John Keel's interview with him. And he also started to connect the incidents of Cold and the Mothman, and then would popularize the term Men in Black through his writing, who also began to appear all over Point Pleasant directly after the sighting of the Mothman took place. Mm-hmm. And this is when Keel started entering some deep conspiracy theory territory. Keel also noticed that things were happening to himself and others who were trying to look into the story. Anyone who was interviewing witnesses or even looking for Mothman out by the TNT area. Phone lines would go dead, or you would hear them getting tapped while you were on the phone. Mailed documents to Keel. He would get letters, he would open it up, store it, and then he'd wake up the next day and they would be changed. He would see black vehicles on the corners of every street he was on, and when he was driving, there would often be one black vehicle 2 or 3 cars behind him, and this is where the Men in Black theory started.
Oh, well, all right.
He believed these were government agents who were sent to silence anyone trying to discover the truth behind these sightings. Soon, however, as all sensations do, it began to quiet down. Keel would have much less to do in Point Pleasant, much less people to talk to, as he basically done it all. Sightings stopped, and he would end up going back to New York. He would return now and again to interview 1 or 2 people who would reach out to him saying, oh, I have a story about this, or I think I saw something. But by the end of 1967, he was hardly there. When he was home in New York, he actually had his last trip to Point Pleasant, got back home to New York, and he had strange dreams, and he got a phone call from none other than the long-forgotten Indrid Cold.
My guy! Let's fucking go!
He gave John Keel a call on his phone. And he said on the phone that he said Keel needs to stay away from Point Pleasant, and hung up. Now, Keel wasn't sure if this was a threat or a warning for his safety, but he was not there for the end of the year, which brings us to the next part of our episode, which is part 3, called The Silver Bridge. On December 15th of 1967, Point Pleasant had a massive tragedy that it would never forget. At 5 o'clock in the evening, during peak rush hour traffic during the Christmas season, the 700-foot silver bridge that connected Point Pleasant to the other side of the Ohio River would collapse.
That's no good.
Tens of cars would be thrown into the freezing cold below, killing 46 people, 2 of which have still never been found.
Oh, wow.
Multiple others suffered injuries from cuts and bruises to broken limbs or severe head trauma, but would survive. Many victims were those who witnessed the Mothman as well.
Huh.
But let's talk about the bridge before we get too deep into this and the supernatural side of things.
Crazy conspiracy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we get too deep into the supernatural, we're going to talk about Silver Bridge. This bridge was made in 1928 and had a lifespan of 10 years. Keep in mind, this was 1967, so it had far exceeded its original lifespan without any serious upkeep being done on the thing ever. It was built to carry lighter loads of cars during the 20s and not rush hour traffic of the modern era. There was many issues with this bridge, and even reports by some safety inspectors of cracks in rivets that were visible from the foundation of the bridge. Now, maintenance was not common during this time. It wasn't very common for people to do maintenance and regular upkeep on things like this because, bridges are bridges. So it was often overlooked. And this tragedy is actually what caused said maintenance to become normal nowadays.
Oh, well, that's, I guess, one
the
good thing.
The silver lining of the Silver Bridge was, yes, that there became a lot of safety regulations put in place and constant maintenance done on things such as bridges. But this, of course, caused the town again to become the hot topic of the news, albeit for a much different tone than a monster sighting. That being said, many locals began to blame the bridge collapse on the Mothman. A reporter named Mary Heyer from the Athens, Ohio, actually knew Keel previously and worked with him before during the Mothman stuff, but she was from Ohio and didn't live in Point Pleasant. But on this incident, the Athens, Ohio paper, which I guess is the sister city of Point Pleasant, Athens, Ohio, and Point Pleasant, I guess. Yeah, apparently they are. And so she was given, she was the one in charge of covering this in the printed media.
Okay.
So she actually was even the one who took John Keel to the airport on his last time returning to New York. So kind of weird that she had this connection to him. She would have a massive job ahead of her covering the bridge collapse as well as all this Mothman talk going around. But that wasn't the only thing happening, Pat. Because God forbid you have a bridge collapse and a monster. There was a third event happening because on the weekend after the bridge tragedy, she got 500 phone calls in one night about dancing lights in the sky. So, that was happening. And one
Butterfly
evening
in the sky.
of January 1968, not long after these sights of lights were happening, she would be at her office, which was in the Point Pleasant courthouse in the back. Not a place people really knew about. Like, she was kind of like in a closet room of the courthouse, where they, basically, I'm sure, wherever they could fit her.
Sure.
She would get a visit from a strange man late at night in the courthouse. So after the courthouse was closed, yeah, yes, but it was not the man you're thinking of. This is a different man. She had never received visitors, and she was suspicious. He is described as being very short, with a big smile, oddly shaped bowl cut, thick glasses, and a hypnotic gaze.
Oh my god, I don't like this. This sounds creepy as fuck.
Creepy as hell. And so he asked her in a very low voice, which she said was full of stuttering, a bunch of questions, but he wasn't interested at all in Mothman or the bridge incident. He only asked about the lights, and also finding out who called and where they lived.
I don't know, man.
So, of course, she didn't give that information out because, reporters don't just give their sources out. But during the conversation, she said he kept inching closer to her, and she got very threatened. Like, she did not feel safe with him. So before things got too far, she did call out for someone, and her boss was nearby. And he said as soon as she called out to her boss, the man paused, turned to leave, but paused, picked up a pen from her desk, and laughed while running out of the office, stealing the pen.
That could have been just a guy on drugs.
100%. So she basically reported it to the police with that as her thought. That's what she basically said. Like, she thinks some crazy person just came in and was being really weird.
I was gonna say that. Yeah, that gives off creepy man energy.
She did not, and I take it from her first person account. I don't think she thought it was very supernatural at the time.
Sounds like an injured cold species of some kind.
Could have been, yeah, could have been. Especially if you're asking about the lights, like who saw us, or a man in black. Remember, because people always describe them as being like very weird and not. And the stuttering of speech is not a common thing, like not really getting the language down correctly because it's like a different, whatever.
Yeah.
There was also reports of this man visiting other houses in the area as well. So there's multiple reports of this man visiting the homes of people who also all saw the lights. According to this story, he made them all very uncomfortable, and they would sometimes he would tell them he was a reporter from Ohio. And when questioned, he knew nothing about the Ohio area and would often leave after being questioned about it. Not many more things would occur in Point Pleasant after this event. And once again, the stories would die down, as with the UFO craze that basically happened in the 60s, starting here. So the 70s brought on a much different tone for Point Pleasant, basically focused on the bridge tragedy. And there was an official investigation by the United States of America taken into the bridge and everything that happened there. And we actually found out what happened. The source was uncovered. There was a suspension eye-bar less than 1/10 of an inch deep, had a crack. And this caused the collapse of the entire bridge.
Well, I'm glad we have maintenance standards now that they have to check those nooks and crannies, because that's scary.
Yeah, it was a thing. But there was also, there was all those stories of Mothman in 66. There was a resurgence of Mothman sightings 2 days before the bridge incident. So that's why a lot of people were blaming the bridge on Mothman. In 1975, John Keel released his now famous book, The Mothman Prophecies, which would once again stir the pot of conspiracy and UFO theorists around the country and put Mothman into the media again. The book told many stories and the events of the 66 flap, the Mothman sightings, and even the bridge incident. I've read this whole book. Well, I listened to the whole audiobook of this, as well as I mentioned the other book in the 66 episode, which was actually Woodrow Derenberger's book called My Journey to Lanulos. So that book and this book, Mothman Prophecies, I did for the 66 Clap episode. And I didn't talk about this one because it's way more relevant to this, but the Mothman Prophecies book is just paranoid ramblings of a crazy person. It is fucking insane. Like, it is wild. The things that, the logic jumps and just going to left and right with craziness all over that book.
It's like fucking, Oh my God! Never mind. Just keep going.
He basically says things with no proof, doesn't like source his things. What were you gonna
Got it.
say?
It's like Alex Jones. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, less extreme, but yeah, less extreme and less crazy. But yeah, no, clearly he believed in this. Imagine doing that, but just Mothman's real, and he's coming for you. That's all this book was.
Yep.
So he talks about having psychic visions that the Mothman gave him. The Indrid Cold gave him dreams about the bridge before it happened. Like
Alex Jones is crazier than this guy.
Yeah, but it's Alex Jones is crazier than this guy. But it was just it's nuts. It's a tough read. It's a tough thing to listen to if you have any sense. Because again, he just says things like they're fact when they're definitely not fact. So Point Pleasant did carry on over the years. It's still a town today. It grew and it recovered. It has a new bridge. It would never be able to escape the UFO Mothman legend. The official Mothman Museum is open in Point Pleasant if you want to visit, with the very famous nice-assed chrome statue of Mothman out front.
That's right.
Yeah.
You can touch it. Doesn't it give you good luck or some shit?
Yeah, you're supposed to rub his ass, and it's a famous thing where people take pictures holding his ass. They don't stop you at all. They let you do it. There's tons of people do it. They're like, go take a picture with his ass. It looks great.
Dude, we're pro ass play at Point Pleasant. You know what I mean?
They're into it.
Oh, yeah.
This legend of the Mothman would still be mentioned, and sightings would rarely occur, but they do still happen today, specifically around the area, but all over the United States. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple other famous sightings, one of which happened, we're going to go back to the past. There was a Mothman sighting in a battle between the Russian and Ottoman forces in the First World War.
Okay, I'd like to hear this. This is a very big jump.
Yeah, it's not a lot of it happens in modern day Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan.
That sounds like it would be absolutely gorgeous.
It's where most of the oil in the world is.
Okay, well,
they would be battling in that area, and both sides would report to their commanders a screeching, almost metallic sounding winged man with red eyes flying over the battlefield. So the witnesses, the people who saw it, describe it as a vulture man. But again, remember, Mothman's he doesn't actually look that much like a moth. It's just that was his third name. So yeah, they don't describe bat wings, but they do describe a winged man, going over. They describe him looking like a vulture, but the metallic screech sounds familiar. Also, this leads to credence. This was sighted before the final push of the battle by both sides. So almost as if a warning, maybe? Perhaps a warning? Maybe like he warned people about a bridge about to collapse in Point Pleasant? Maybe?
He eats dogs.
You know what else? Okay, maybe this will change your mind. He was also seen in New York. You know when he was seen in New York?
9/11.
The 10th of September in 2001.
Wow, no way!
Yes.
Okay. Right.
He was seen by multiple people in the city and around the city just before the events of 9/11.
Maybe he didn't eat the dog. Maybe he saved the dog from an abusive owner.
Maybe he took the dog to Landulos. Who knows? So, yeah, he warned people about the 9/11 tragedy. In 2002, the Mothman Prophecies movie came out.
Oh.
It's a fun film.
I don't know.
It's a wild movie. It did well. It did good in the box office. Like, it's a famous film. People love that movie.
Okay.
It did pretty good, but it did inject Mothman into the culture's fucking zeitgeist again, which is why he's still here today. The Mothman Prophecies movie is what brought him into like the craziness of
I love it.
of the media. So what is Mothman? Like, theoretically, there's a couple things we actually talked about. My absolute favorite theory, because I want to believe it so bad, in the Flap of 66 episode, where he's an alien that accidentally got put on Earth by Indrid Cold's people, and they came to kill him or get rid of him. That was like the whole we talked about this. Like, he's a bounty hunter trying to kill the Mothman. I love that idea. It makes me smile inside to imagine there's alien bounty hunters killing aliens on our planet.
Well, maybe not killing, but just trying to capture.
Or get rid of them, capture it or move them out. There's a theory that maybe they got here a lot earlier, and they were again like they shouldn't be here, so maybe they breed, and there's a bunch of Mothmen,
Yeah, like it's very scarce, but they're so powerful and hard to take out that they're actually apex predators, but there's too many of them to actually like fight. Or there's not enough of them. I mean.
Yeah. There's not enough of them, or they're just like maybe they're not even predators, but they're just something that shouldn't be here. So
right.
Because no one's been killed by the Mothman.
Well, okay, so we're on episode 58 of Lore Lords. Sure, some episodes are about Zelda and Final Fantasy, but like so many episodes have been about all of these crazy things. It's like I feel like if you're trying to sum up history, it's like all of history can be relatively recorded. There's plenty of things to have opinions on, a lot of mixed history and propaganda, blah blah blah. But there's like 5% of history that's just everybody looking around going, I don't fucking know.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
And this is just one of those things where it feels like what you're saying is like it would be kind of cool if Indrid Cold and other Indrid Cold and that other guy maybe and the Men in Black were all like, you know, creature bounty hunters, and it's like it feel like it's almost at this point so easy to buy into the idea that you know, there is life on other places and they actually have discovered us and they've actually been like peeking over at us and they've interacted with us in very small, tiny, seemingly insignificant, I should say, ways. And then there's mistakes that are made like Mothman and stuff like that. It really feeds into this whole idea that's basically existed since the beginning of man, that there are things that happen that even at the end of the day, our military experts shrug their shoulders at. Like all those UFO sightings, a lot of our military experts just go, I don't fucking know. They could be lying. They could be testing new military tech or some shit. Absolutely. But the idea that so many people see these things and just shrug their shoulders at the end of the day is kind of a big deal. Like I feel like that is too many anecdotes. I don't usually listen to anecdotes. But
people want answers, and when the government just goes, right. I don't fucking know, dude. It's either that they're lying is a more comfortable answer. The scarier answer is that they actually don't know.
I agree, because I think it's way scarier if they don't know. That's kind of why I'm like that's why I'm the proponent of although this is just me in general, of like all the information out, please. Like just give us all the information. Tell us everything, you know. Well, except for like the location. Even if they
did, people wouldn't believe it. It wouldn't change that. People would be like, "Oh, you're hiding stuff." You know what I mean? That would never stop.
It's true.
It's true. But it's just like, yeah, it's scary that they don't know. They might have been recording it for years, but they're like, they still just don't know the answer, which means there's something greater than us out there doing this kind of stuff, you know?
And the other theory is, notice how ever since the 60s, the late 60s, and especially in the 70s is when sci-fi became a bigger thing. Like,
you're talking about
before Star Wars.
You're talking about the idea that they're drip feeding us stuff for disclosure. Right. They're trying to the world's trying to get used to the idea that aliens are real.
Yeah, exactly. And because I mean that's exactly when those movies became popular.
Yeah.
Like what's the one that was like it was a big one? It was
2001: A Space Odyssey?
Well, that's one of them, yes. But there was another one I'm thinking of, and it's driving me crazy. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But yeah, there's like it might have been 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is hilarious because 2001 just had 9/11 and the beginning of the beginning of a housing crisis. But yeah, no, I just think that's kind of like what's going on. It's because that's kind of how humans work, and we've existed long enough now to where we can figure that out on a macro scale, being like, all right, we need to slowly introduce this subject to people or else, you know? Yeah. And now we're at that point, I feel like, especially with like the younger generation, like you and I, we literally grew up looking at aliens going, all right, you know, like we grew up with them as a norm. So like, I feel like that's going to be a huge step, which is why I hope we get the phone call from our boy.
Please, let me know.
Make it us too, because I could use that fat bag.
Yeah,
I would love to not worry about money anymore.
Yeah, seriously.
I'd totally spend. That's probably why he's not calling us, because we'd use it for financial gain.
It's like, oh,
make me rich, alien boy. Come on.
We can't trust the lore lords. They'll monetize us.
It's true. It's absolutely true. No, I'm just joking. But, I mean, if I could make some money, I'm not saying no to that. But I'm more interested in the bigger historical thing for sure. The big groundbreaking, monumental truth discovery. I'm much more interested in that because also I'd die in the history books.
Yeah, but as far as we're talking about Mothman, we started talking about aliens because of Mothman. That's what people. That's the general agreement. Like people think Bigfoot's like a missing link. People think the Jersey Devil's like some magical creature in the woods. That's, a fucked up person. mom or
Right.
mom's kid or Antichrist bullshit.
Skinwatchers are always watching you.
Yeah, Skinwalkers and Wendigo have their own like lore behind it. Mothman doesn't have like an ancient lore like that at all. So it's basically people just assume he's an alien. That's like his kind of like connection to the greater scheme of things is alien based.
I just love the idea of some humble guy just being like, I don't know, he's an alien, I guess.
I guess he's from Lanulos, like that cold feller.
That cold guy, he's pretty chilly.
One of my favorite parts about the Lanula story too is they say it's like in our solar system, like by Mercury or something like that.
Yeah, I've heard that.
It's like, yeah, we didn't, we just missed that one.
It's like, no, man, like that. Yeah, my favorite bullshit theories are like, there's a planet hiding behind another planet. I'm like, no, there's not. Like, no.
Yeah, we just happened
maybe
to
an
miss one.
asteroid or
Hooking
two,
up.
but yeah, maybe. But that's the whole plot of that movie. Not Cloverfield. Melancholia, I think, is the whole point. Is that there was a secret planet that comes spinning around the sun and smashes into Earth and kills
I don't think
us.
I've ever even heard of that.
Yeah, all I know is Kirsten Dunst poses naked in the moonlight, and I was like, "Why is this happening in the movie?" But I was very unexpected.
Maybe you should see the sequel called Mothman Prophecies.
The Earth is dead after that movie, though.
And then Mothman saves it. He resurrects it.
Oh my God, that's the real ending.
That's the real ending. Anyway, that's everything I have for Mothman.
Great.
That's the end of the episode. We did it. I didn't
That
go
was
too
wonderful.
crazy. There's like a billion more stories I could talk about, but whatever. I don't want to do a 3-part Mothman episode. The other part is Flappa 66. So you can learn more, a little bit more there. We talk a little bit about the Mothman, but not much.
What I like about it is you could listen to this episode or the Flap of 66 in either order, and it would make sense.
100%, yeah. You can listen to either
really
one.
cool.
They're both part 1 and 2 of each other at the same time.
Basically.
So yeah,
And I lose my mind in both of them. When I
yeah.
start
Pat goes
ranting
crazy
about-
on both and wants aliens to call him on his phone.
Or just ring my doorbell and say hi. You know what I mean? Like, I'll invite you in for some coffee. If you're not, well, unless like you can't have processed beans, because if you can't, then maybe your digestion.
If you can, I
you're
guess
not eating
you're
my cat.
I guess you're some kind of baby pussy alien, huh?
You pussy. You
Can't
baby
drink
pussy.
coffee like a man. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening so
Hey,
much.
bye.
That's the end of Lore Lords. Have a great night, and we'll see you next time.